So in this segment, we're going to be discussing kind of the Sam Bright's interview on Politics Show. We're doing a snippet of it, and I think it's really worth listening to. Politics Show do great work in terms of some of the reporting they do. I've never seen a channel do comedy and serious stuff as well as they've done it. So, big respect to them for that. And I think it's important to look at, Tufton Street. That's the bit we want to be focusing on, because there's a lot of, you see these kind of IEA people, the Institute of Economic Affairs, and all these random kind of think tanks appear on various news networks, on the BBC, on LBC. No one knows who funds them. No one knows what they're, what they're really about, apart from their right-wing ideology, their libertarian ideology. But they're very, very opaque about who funds them and everything else. And I've got a feeling, before we start the interview, I've got a feeling that a lot of these kind of editors and people at these news channels and radio stations that get these people on for panel shows are thinking, right, how do I do this the easiest way possible? I know we need a right winger on, or someone who represents the libertarians or whatever. They're going to call up someone at Tufton Street and they're going to say, oh, we've got such and such a person who's free on that day to do media interviews. And I genuinely think that's how it works. I think they probably do certain stuff. I don't want to conflate anyone else with Tufton Street, so I'm not going to mention names, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go to certain left-wing networks and say, have you got someone who can come in on this day? We pay X amount to be on this panel show or whatever. And I wouldn't be surprised if, certain cuts were given to the media organisations for it, and that might be a way they fund their operation. But let's cut to the interview before I say any more.
Bullingdon, we've talked about these small little circles and the influences of power, but the biggest influence on Whitehall and Westminster is Tufton Street. And what is that exactly?
So Tufton Street is a street in Westminster that is lined by libertarian think tanks. So that may be confusing. Both of those things may be confusing. Libertarian essentially means believing in the free market, in a small state, in fewer regulations, in lower taxes. And a think tank is essentially an organisation that puts out reports on certain key policy issues. And yeah, like you say, these libertarian free market think tanks that have lined Tufton Street have had an outsized influence on government policy, certainly on Liz Truss's administration.
So, libertarians, you're talking about neoliberal kind of ideology of low tax, low state, like you mentioned, the idea that because we're, rational people, why should we have certain laws in place, which is a dangerous road to go down, especially when we have, speed limits for a reason in residential areas and near schools, because people are lunatics, people are absolute morons. With the Liz Truss thing, they were at the Conservative Party press conference. They were directly in her ear, whispering to her, telling her what to do. And I think that failed, kamikaze budget was partially down to certain groups like the IEA. And you had one of those guys, he was crying after, Liz Truss was deposed and the tax cuts were reversed. He was crying, saying, all of this stuff has taken us back, potentially by decades, because, now the public, when they look at these tax cuts, they're going to think of the kamikaze budget and the way the bond prices went up and all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, you try to borrow billions of pounds for tax cuts. Like, that was never going to work. You didn't set the stage properly, despite the fact that these think tanks have been talking about kind of Thatcherite economics or Reaganomics for decades now. Absolute decades. You couldn't convince the markets that what you were doing was the right thing. That's all it was. The markets thought this looks really dodgy, and decided to sell off the bonds. And that's what happened. So, they were directly in her ear, Liz Truss's ear and kamikaze's ear, saying, this is a great idea. And then what happened? Some of these hedge fund managers made off like bandits as they shorted bonds, and the taxpayer ultimately suffered, because these people are lunatics.
And look how that turned out. But yeah, they're notoriously opaque about who funds them. So the few nibs of information that we've managed to find out over the years suggests that it's sort of big corporate interests, really, fossil fuel companies, big tobacco actually, in more distant memory, but certainly, influential at one point in time.
And, these are just classic lobbyists, in a different shape here. The only difference is they've got a street that's right in Westminster, so they can lobby directly to MPs. That's it, pretty much. They've located themselves at the heart of government. We've seen big tobacco before when they got scientists and people like that to say, smoking's not bad for you. oil isn't causing climate change, stuff like that. That's all this is. It's just a new form of it. This isn't, this lobbying isn't new. They've been doing it for forever now. Getting in politicians is giving certain, enough donations to the right people in order to get certain policies passed or not passed. That's pretty much it. The only difference with Tufton Street is they're trying to influence the public as well. They're on the news channels. They're everywhere talking about we need to privatise the NHS. Oh, it's not sustainable. We need to privatise this and that, tax cuts here and there, cut regulations. One of them was saying we should legalise handguns in the UK. Like, are you insane? Like honestly, I'm just astonished that these people keep getting taken for panel shows for the sake of balance. If you bring a person who is centre left, right, and you bring the biggest right wing lunatic who belongs in Arkham Asylum, that's not balance. Because if you think it is, maybe you should be in the asylum with him.
And essentially, yeah, as I say in the book, Tufton Street and these think tanks are a really key part of sort of like the production, the Bullingdon Club production line. So they've been paid by these corporate interests, by these plutocrats, by the oligarchs of not just Britain but the world, to basically take philosophies that would benefit those people and advocate for them in Parliament, and to say to MPs, we should lower this tax, and it would have a tremendous effect on the productivity of the nation. And politicians as they are, with a lack of actual public policy expertise, hugely busy people, if they're presented with this sort of ready-made policy and it kind of chimes with their ideological instincts, they're going to swallow it. And the Conservative Party has. They've swallowed this really quite radical right-wing belief in the free market, scrap bankers' bonuses, slash the top rate of tax, as we saw. And it's all theoretical. It's like, until Truss, it had kind of been tested through austerity and failed miserably, and hundreds of thousands of people had died. And then it was tried again through Liz Truss, and what happened? It crashed the economy. So, it just doesn't work. Essentially what they're doing is paying for this fringe free market belief to be a mainstream opinion in Westminster and in the House of Commons.
I don't think it is a theoretical argument, or was. I think we knew it wasn't going to work. You can't cause growth through tax cuts, because if you give tax cuts to the rich, all that will happen is the money will just sit in their account. One of the reasons I think Thatcher grew the economy so much was because she pushed the service industry where you can increase tax revenue, but it's also because she privatised a lot, and that gives a lot of money to central government. It doesn't end well. That when you privatise stuff, when you give tax cuts to the rich, it doesn't end well. In order to get the economy growing, you need consumption. You need people at the lower and bottom end to be able to spend money, because once they can buy, not just essentials but also kind of luxuries and things like that, it causes more growth in the economy. That's what it is. It's not trickle down economics. It's upshot economics. That's what you want. But it's just ultimately it's just frustrating. There is one more thing I wanted to discuss around Tufton Street, and look, as a dude, I would never, I try not to criticize ladies' appearances. I don't think it's ever a good idea to do that. There's misogynism, and you don't want to get told off either. But I do find it interesting, one of the points Ava makes here.
One thing that really bothers me about this, and you don't need to comment on this, but I will make the comment, it always, or a lot of the time, it actually seems to be young, attractive women, and I find that really bothersome. That really grates on me, because it'll be young women. Journalism is difficult for young girls trying to get in, and they're offered this opportunity. We're going to put you on camera, we're going to let you experience journalism, and actually they're just there to spout out the harsh and vile theories of their big pocket owners. Anyway, that's...
So, I'm not going to go into detail here, but there was a certain lady, right, who was on the Sunday Roast channel, and then she was on the BBC, head of communications or whatever for the IEA, and you're thinking, first of all, you're like 20, how are you head of communications? You must be some sort of genius. But this, they find people, I'm not going to comment on appearance, but they find people, to kind of just spout off these right-wing libertarian lines, and I'm going to cover one in a couple of days, hopefully, where Yeah, she's talking about we haven't Brexited enough. Just the same talking points over and over again. They're trying to bombard people with this nonsense, an ideological assault, really, telling us we need to privatise. Brexit hasn't happened properly. All of this other nonsense. Any right-wing talking points, because the idea isn't to just win arguments, because they can't win arguments, not properly. The idea is they put certain thoughts in your head that they keep saying the NHS needs to be privatised, so it must be true. All of this stuff. You repeat a lie. I think as Goebbels said it, you just keep repeating the lie, and it becomes the truth in people's heads. The NHS isn't working. Why isn't it working? Oh, it's because we need to privatise it. You pick something that has a problem, a small kernel of truth in it, which is the NHS is struggling. What's the solution? It isn't to fund it more, which we obviously know it's true, to give people pay rises. Staff retention really is the key here. No. They say none of that. We need to privatise it. And they'll look at other countries that have private healthcare, and you're like, well, what's their health outcomes like, for example? And I'm just getting sick of it. And I think if you're, look, I'm not a journalist and I don't pretend to be. The biggest bit of journalism I've done for the channel is going to the pharmacy, my local pharmacy, to ask what's the medicine shortage like. So yeah, that's the best bit of journalism I do. But holding on to morals is important. Sacrificing your morals for what? So you can be on TV, so you can make some quick cash. What does that get you in the end? Sure, you can end up like Laura Kuenssberg or Robert Peston, head of ITV, head of BBC, really prestigious organisations. Well, at least Kuenssberg was at some point, chief political editor, but there can only be one of those. There's only so many positions for sellouts. So you got to really ask yourself, if you're a sellout, if you want to sell out, are you going to sell out hard enough? Are you going to really make it to the top? Is it really worth it? Is sanity the price to pay for power? That's the question you've got to ask yourself, because I failed to say the logic. Anyways, I'm gonna leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. Shouts out Politics Show. If you want to watch the rest of the interview, I'll link it below. Shouts out Sam Bright as well, because there's some interesting stuff here. And the Bullingdon Club are. I'm not going to go into them, but yeah, he seems to have covered them quite well. So I'll catch you in the next one.